Welcome to IVF This, Greatest Hits, Episode 7, Mental Flexibility. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you are all doing so well today. The next couple of weeks, we're going to go back to the well to some of the previous podcast episodes. If you have listened for any length of time, you know that the greatest hits episodes are episodes that I've done in the past that I have found either a recurring theme rather, that shows up again and again and again, that maybe we want to bring that topic back to the forefront of y'all's podcast downloads, really the forefront of your mind. So mental flexibility is one of those topics that comes up so often. And I think especially in kind of today's political climate, there's just a lot of uncertainty. And so developing mental flexibility or mental resiliency, they're kind of synonymous within this podcast, I think is a really, really amazing skill to learn and continue to develop. It's not a one and done thing. For instance, I have been working on this for many, many years, and I'm still learning new things about myself and new ways in which I can be more flexible, be more intentional with my thoughts. So I think it's a really great reminder on how to do that. And I provide some information in this episode. I do want to say that the introduction to this episode was about 2 years ago when we were going through our very last IVF cycle. So just be cognizant of that. I'm not going through another IVF cycle. We are done with our family building journey. So if that throws you for a loop, that's why. It's the only reason, I promise. You're not missing out on anything. We didn't miss an announcement. So I hope you enjoy this replay of mental flexibility. And as always, if this is something that you need some help with, or you would like to learn the skills of mental flexibility, I as always offer these free mini sessions. It's 30 minutes of straight coaching. You can get to the link to schedule your free mini session either on my website, which is www.ivfthiscoaching.com, or you can go to one of my social media links, either my Instagram or my Facebook, and the link in my bio has the link for that free mini session to book it. So I hope you enjoy and have a great week. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you're all doing so well. Spring has, sprung in Central Texas, and we're already starting to heat up here in Austin. Today's temps are like 97 degrees, and I'm not really emotionally ready for that kind of temp. So your coach is struggling a little bit with some irrational anger towards the hot weather, but not to worry. I go through this particular morning cycle every time this time of year, so it's pretty typical. We'll be okay. And it's been a while since I offered some personal updates, so I wanted to let you know what we're doing tomorrow. Literally tomorrow, the day after I record this episode, I will start leave for having our baby. We are incredibly excited to be here, honestly, because we didn't think we would ever get to do this again. It's quite humbling, actually. We were pretty sure that our journey was over in 2020 when our last embryo transfer failed. It's interesting because I talk a lot about consequences with my client, and I think most people think of consequences as a bad thing. My husband, who's an economist, doesn't really call them consequences. He calls them trade-offs, meaning that everything has a trade-off. So I was thinking back to late summer, early fall of 2020, and how I was pretty sure our journey was over, and I was grieving this idea, this expectation for how I thought our journey would look. I think all of us can relate to that. I was devastated that it didn't work. I was angry that we went through all of that for essentially a negative test. Again, I think most of us can relate to that. And then I started moving more towards acceptance. I still wanted to try, but hubby was pretty resistant. He was not on board at that time. And it was much more important to me that he come to a decision on his own rather than me shoving my preferences down his throat. So I got to work on acceptance and loving the life that I had right now, as opposed to the fantasy life that I'd kind of created in my head. And I got there. Now, it took months of concerted efforts, journaling, all the things that I talk about. And then right around the time that I had pretty much settled into this place of acceptance, and I didn't feel that kind of tug of longing like I had, my husband sort of casually mentioned, I'm kind of getting excited about the idea of having another kid. Mind you, this was more than 6 months after our failed cycle. And if you followed our story, then you know that we did our second full IVF cycle in May of 2021, and we had a frozen embryo transfer in July of 2021. And now we are under 24 hours away from meeting our last little one. My husband and I each had to grapple with trade-offs. Which trade-off were we more comfortable with? Well, that's obviously a very individual experience. A trade-off that would be acceptable to me might not be acceptable to him. For instance, one of the big trade-offs that I had would be to go through the entire process again, knowing full well that we did not have great odds and weighing the huge financial risk of the whole process versus never trying again and living with the what ifs. This, I think, is probably one of the most common trade-offs with IVF. Now, before I really got to work on acceptance, the idea of accepting anything less than what I had previously decided what I always wanted, which was 3 children, seemed like it was impossible. Like I would die if that was not the case, if that did not happen, that it would feel like death, that I would have to accept something less. And maybe you feel like that too. It might be something different for you, right? A different circumstance, a different number, whatever. But this deeply held belief that we have, it would feel like we might die if we didn't get that. And it took me a lot of work to really deeply love my life, even though it was very different from how I had expected, how I had planned. And then we decided to pursue IVF one more time. We jumped through all the hoops, we paid all the money, we did all of the things. And now on the other side, it kind of feels like anything but this would be death. Now, this is the interesting part. Both of these beliefs were and are true for me at the time that I was thinking them. And this is what's called mental flexibility. That's what we're going to talk about today. I've talked before about emotional resilience, the skill you can develop through thought work of being less reactive to the world around you and to your own brain. Emotional resilience helps you learn to live kind of a more even keel, where you experience the full range of emotions still, but you don't have such big swings and crashes, and you don't feel out of control and at the mercy of your own feelings. The peaks and valleys aren't quite as high or low, not that you feel muted in your experience, but it doesn't feel as volatile. Most of us are too changeable in our emotions, and we have to learn how to bring it all down, break it into smaller variants, smaller swings, so that we feel more stable. We're not able to swing wildly into our thoughts, right? We're rigid and attached to what we think and believe. And that's why mental flexibility is such an important concept. Mental flexibility is the capacity, the skill of training your brain to be open to new ideas, new thoughts, new perspectives. And brains don't like to be challenged or to be wrong. When that happens, we tend to experience a phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the mental tension that is caused by the conflict between 2 different or opposing thoughts or ideas, which contradict each other. And the way humans deal with that is by unconsciously dismissing the new or conflicting idea and mostly doubling down in their belief of the first idea. So this is why if you're talking to someone, and they've done studies on this, if you don't believe in climate change and you are shown evidence of climate change, it doesn't change your mind. It actually makes your brain find reasons to dismiss or reject evidence. It's overhyped, scientists are biased, it's happening, but it's not man-made, whatever the arguments are. People are actually report believing more strongly in their original belief after it's been challenged. And this is why trying to persuade someone to a different opinion is so damn frustrating and often backfires. You may actually just prompt their brain to get more entrenched in their original belief. And if this is happening to you, it's okay. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you, that you're stubborn or you're stupid, or that other people are necessarily stubborn or stupid. It is an unconscious process that happens because our brains don't want to be wrong. Our brains have to filter and interpret so much information every single day. We use a lot of shortcuts, and I've talked about that on the podcast before. We want to just know when we look at a chair that it's a chair. Our brain uses that shortcut. That's a chair. It's got 4 legs on it. They're going all the way to the ground. There's a flat surface to sit on. Maybe there's a back to it. Maybe there's not. But we know that's a chair. Rather than every time you wake up being like, wait, what the hell is that? What is that shape? Why is that there? What is it doing? If your brain had to reevaluate every single thing it thought every time it thought about it, your brain would fry. You would never be able to get out of bed. So your brain just likes to have shortcuts, and it doesn't want to be wrong about anything, let alone the shortcuts. Being wrong feels dangerous. It's exhausting, and it would be overwhelming. And what if you're wrong? And who can we trust? And what food is safe? Or whatever else. Our brain thinks that being wrong is dangerous, that we might die. So your brain would rather be certain, even if it's wrong, because your brain does not want that feeling of instability. It doesn't want to think, oh my God, what else am I wrong about? Our brains experience that as a threat. If you came out in the morning and all of a sudden your chair was walking and talking, you would be super freaked out. This is an unconscious process. The good news is that we can bring it into consciousness and work on changing it in the places we want to. So we can let it continue running unconsciously for identifying objects and being able to drive without thinking very carefully about every moment and every turn. And that's why, when you've been to some place, when you've driven someplace over and over and over, it's really easy. And sometimes you kind of look up and you're like, how the hell did I get here? Right? We can let our brain do this unconscious process wherever we don't really care about changing our thoughts. But we can learn to change the process in the places that it would serve us to do so. Thought work is what can allow us to develop the skill of being mentally or emotionally comfortable with kind of losing our ish. Because that's what's really going on. When your brain experiences cognitive dissonance, it's uncomfortable and it thinks it's probably going to die. And so instead of allowing that discomfort and being curious about it, it doubles down on its original belief. Mental rigidity, right? We're talking about mental flexibility. That is mental rigidity. It just puts its foot down like, nope, this is it. I'm standing firm. I'm gripping on this. This is the only truth. Learning to allow the discomfort that will just come in your brain and body when your thoughts are challenged is a skill you can learn. And that's what produces mental flexibility. Ironically, this can be a matter of life and death. Our brains think that mental rigidity will keep us safe, but just look at the COVID pandemic. People's cognitive dissonance is preventing them from being able to change their minds to adapt to new data. So no matter how much evidence there is that COVID is real and killing people, there are people who are invested in believing the opposite and will not change their minds. I think this is probably culturally too. We're particularly resistant to changing our minds. I do believe humans are like this in general, for all of the reasons I've just described. It's evolutionary psychology. But I think in the US, we almost seem to delight in the stubbornness. We, in some ways, look down on expertise and critical analysis. I think we tend to value anecdotal evidence more, maybe because it feels more relatable. I'm not really sure. I mean, think of all the people in the world that think that IVF is morally wrong. I was raised Catholic, and there are very strong opinions about IVF within the Catholic faith. It's not shared by everyone that identifies as a Catholic, but for those who do, it can be very contentious of an issue. People will steadfastly argue that IVF is playing God, and that is their wholehearted belief. Now, the cognitive dissonance is that that is true for them. That's not, say, my viewpoint. My viewpoint is that IVF is a medical intervention for a disease, and we don't really have that type of resistance towards other medical surgical interventions, say like open heart surgery or diabetes medications or things like that. Now, those are two contradictory thoughts, and I can allow for that person to believe that they are right, and I can still believe that I am right, and neither of us has to change, and that's okay. Now, do I believe that I am more right? Of course I do. I'm human. My mind, just like all of yours, likes to believe that it is certain. We want to be certain because we think that will be safe. But we're not safe when we're like that. We're rigid. It makes us blind. Mental flexibility is the ability to contemplate new ideas and be open to changing our minds. There is tremendous power of imagination and intellect required to see things from multiple perspectives, to hold two competing thoughts or ideas at the same time. That's a level of intellectual sophistication that I think we could all aspire to because it's so useful for us in our lives. To look at a circumstance and see how two people can have completely different thoughts about it, and neither is more objectively true than the other person, because they're both true to that person who holds that belief. They seem true to that person. This skill is crucial for thought work because thought work is all about coming to believe new things that you haven't believed before. And I think sometimes we expect that should be easy, as if we just had never thought of this thought we could think, but that as soon as we hear it, we will totally adopt it. Sometimes we think a new thought and we're just off to the races. But when we're challenging really deeply held beliefs that we've had about ourselves for a long time, that's not usually how it works. It's not just that you've never thought to believe that you can, let's say, become a parent. It's not that you had no thought about being a parent and now you've discovered that you could be one. Usually the case is you already subconsciously believe that it isn't possible for you to become a parent. You see what I mean? It's not that there was a devoid of thoughts about the subject and now you've learned a new one. Mental flexibility is the capacity to be introduced to a new thought or idea that challenges your existing belief structure and not immediately reject it. This doesn't mean you have to go straight to believing the new thing 1,000, 1,000,000%, because you can't yet most of the time. And that's why the flexibility aspect is so important. Mental flexibility is a skill, the practice that helps you get through this uncomfortable period where you believe both things. Mental flexibility is what allows you to simultaneously hold conflicting beliefs. Your old belief that you won't be a parent and your new belief that maybe you can become a parent and that process might look different than how you had originally believed it would. You believe both of them, on and off, depending on what you're thinking at any given moment. You're working on believing the new one more and more, but you still kind of hold on to the old one. If you're mentally rigid, then you can't cope with this dissonance, with this conflict, the discomfort that comes up with considering what you're wrong about is too much for your brain. And your brain's total cascade of horror that might mean you're wrong about everything and that chairs aren't chairs and the whole world is collapsing. That's what gets triggered on a primitive level sometimes when we contradict a thought. And when we feel so much resistance, we just give up. We think it means something has gone wrong. We resist the old thought and we freak the hell out. The refusal to allow both to be true, ironically, means you usually end up defaulting to the old belief since you're not ready for it to go away yet. But if you can allow both to exist in your mind, if you can practice mental flexibility, then you can strengthen the new belief until it becomes the only one that seems true to you. Something rigid, if you try to change it, if you need to make it shorter or wider, if you need to bend it or reshape it, it will break. Apply any force to something too rigid and it will snap. But something flexible can be shaped and molded into something different. So the way you practice this is by leaning into the discomfort you feel when someone offers you a thought that contradicts your own. Whether it's coaching or politics or any area of your life, it's just a thought. It can't hurt you. Looking at it to see if it might be true to that person or true for you in some way or a thought you might want to entertain is not dangerous. Your brain thinks it's a threat, but it's not. It's a thought. So allow that discomfort that comes up. It may even feel physical, and that's okay. You just breathe through it. You reconnect with yourself and you breathe through it. Try to imagine the thought honestly. Examine it as if you've just woken up from a coma and you didn't know that you already disagreed with it. It doesn't mean you have to end up deciding to accept it and believe it and change your original thought. But the ability to see how and why this thought might be true for someone else or could be true for you is crucial. There's one other thing about mental flexibility that I want to point out for you all, which is that one of the upsides of practicing this skill is that it allows you to hold competing truths in your mind about yourself, which is a phenomenal tool for practicing self-compassion and acceptance. I say competing truths, but really I just mean competing thoughts. If you're willing to be mentally flexible and allow for contradictions, it means that you can look at yourself and say, rather than just see yourself as negative because you're not perfectly positive, you can see that two things can be different at the same time. You're a mom who yells at your kids and you're a mom who's patient with your kids. Just depends on the moment. You're a supportive partner and you're not a supportive partner sometimes. Just depends on the moment. Some days you're an incredibly productive employee and some days you're not. Just depends on the days. We think we have to be all or one or the other, but being human isn't that simple. Sometimes we think, feel, and act one way, sometimes another. We're both, most of us, most of the time. And all of it is okay. And the irony is always that we think resisting what we don't like about ourselves will change it. But in fact, it's accepting and allowing that you are both that allows you to move more into alignment with the thing that you want to be. The same is true with thoughts. Allowing that you believe both things, the new thought and the old thought, is what allows you to practice without so much drama, moving into alignment with a new thought that you want to believe. Growing and evolving and becoming the person you want to be and challenging some of the most fundamental beliefs that you have about yourself is probably not going to feel good. It's going to feel uncomfortable and you're not going to feel stable. And we want to lean into that. We don't get a flexible brain just by magic. We get it by practicing the skill of holding contradictory ideas or thoughts together in your mind, allowing them to be there. Allowing someone to suggest the opposite of what you think without freaking out. Being open to hearing how something you immediately disagree with could be true. This is how you develop mental flexibility. The more willing you are to adopt a new thought, even when it contradicts your current beliefs, the more radically your life will change, and the more mental flexibility you are or you have, the less time it ends up taking to shift those thoughts. But you have to earn that flexibility by practicing and building up that skill. And it's a skill that I hope each and every one of you open up and allow yourselves to learn, because it really can change your whole life. It really can change the vice grip that feelings have over you. It really can change how compassionate you are to others, and most importantly, yourself. And that is what I want for each and every one of you. Okay, that is what I have for you today. Have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.